Welcome to the latest edition of the Pump Fake. I'm Jarrett Bailey from USA Today. Joining me today, VP of Consumer Sports, it's Eric Eager. It's good to see you, buddy. How are you?
Hey, things are good. The off season is almost over, so I can't complain much at all.
We're what, 3 weeks-ish now away from training camp? I think once we hit like 4th of July, the rest of the summer kind of just flies by fast enough where, all right, preseason comes, Hall of Fame stuff, and then we're kind of in go mode until February.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like during the off season, you certainly have a schedule, but your schedule is not nowhere near as like sort of regular as it is once you get to the season. So for those of us that love structure, the season is almost the perfect thing, and it's it's coming fast.
Yeah, and as the season gets closer, guys like you and I, we start to predict, project, and figure out what we think's going to happen. So what we're going to do, we just did the NFC show with Amy Trask. Now we're doing the AFC show of best case scenario, worst case scenario. We'll get in our hot tub time machine. I'll present you with a scenario that if it happened, we just kind of discuss how and why it happened. So we'll start in the AFC East. If I told you in February of 2024 that the Miami Dolphins missed the playoffs, why would that have happened?
I think, well, for one, I think they lose week one to the Chargers. That to me is like the one, like in week one, that actually is the best game because I think both teams need to win that game to like have an upper hand just because of how.
Well, first of all, to win
the
the Twitter battle, to win the social media battle between the respective Justin Herbert and Tua Tagovailoa fans that will clash in week one.
Which is unhinged, by the way. I can't believe, it's so funny that we have no nuance on it. Herbert, probably the better quarterback, but hasn't been as efficient. Tua, very efficient, has won more games, but obviously not quite as good. I would say, beyond that, you're probably looking at stuff like injuries to the defense. You're looking at stuff like injuries to Tua, maybe a meltdown by Tyreek Hill. Although Tyreek Hill has never really melted down on his team other than off the field. So that would be, something that would be different. But to me, it's tough because I think Mike McDaniel is one where pretty sharp guy. We've seen a lot of disciples of Shanahan kind of have their time and kind of peter out a little bit. That would be another one. But for the most part, I think if their quarterback stays healthy and their defense stays healthy, they should be they should be a favorite to make the AFC playoffs.
I think that worst case scenario for the Dolphins is Tua struggles with staying on the field, but also that the Jets are maybe a little bit better than people expect. Like, I think that the consensus on the Jets is, Aaron Rodgers, good defense, they'll be in the mix for a playoff spot. But if the Jets are like, on the same level as the Bills, the Bengals, the Chiefs, then they've got a real problem because then they've got two powerhouses inside their own division. I think they're going to be better than New England. And also, we talk about this a ton over the last year or so. It's the AFC stacked. Like, you still got to deal with it. You pointed out the Chargers, Baltimore. I think Pittsburgh will be better this year. And overall in the AFC, I don't think there's more than like three teams that you can say, all right, they absolutely won't be. They definitely don't have like playoff aspirations. I think you look at the Texans and the Colts, rookie situations, new head coaches. I think we can kind of rule them out. And then outside of that, man, like maybe the Raiders too. Like, I don't see too much with the Raiders, but outside of that, man, like everybody else, you can make a legit case for, they'll be in the mix. And I think that if those teams are, if they live to their best expectations and the Dolphins have to compete with that, then that could be, another outside factor, just, trying to figure out the wild card race.
Yeah, for sure. And, the hard part about the AFC is the number of elite quarterbacks there are, right? And at least if you're the Dolphins, your quarterback's on a rookie contract. So even though he's not maybe a 10 out of 10, he can be a 7 out of 10 and compete because he's not making any money. Yeah. And that's the one edge you have. But when you look at that conference with, Burrow, Allen, Herbert, Rodgers, Russell Wilson, if he were to improve back to where I think people thought he was going to be, and then obviously Patrick Mahomes. Like, it's just really hard to compete like that for a long stretches of time. Now, the Dolphins have had 3 straight winning seasons, and kind of despite that in many ways. But it's an interesting question to pose.
I am excited to see their defense, though. Adding Vic Fangio, trading for Jalen Ramsey. I've seen plenty of people talk about, that being maybe the addition of the offseason for any team. And we're going to see. I think a guy like Christian Wilkins is going to thrive in that system. So defensively for them, obviously Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb as well. I'm excited to see them on that side of the ball, if not more excited than the offensive side, just to see what that can look like. We'll stick in the AFC as we talked about the Jets a little bit. If I told you that the Jets made it to the playoffs and made it to the AFC Championship game, is that their best case scenario in your mind? Because I think Rodgers obviously makes them better, but I don't see them as like an AFC. I have to see them prove it, to be able to consider, they'll be in the conversation of the Bengals and Chiefs and the Bills. I think that their best case scenario is probably getting to the AFC title game, losing to one of those 3 others.
Yeah, with the quarterback like that, though, I think the ceiling is the Super Bowl. And we with Brady in 2020, it was sort of like he was coming off a 2019 season where now their defense is a lot better than the 2022 Packers. But, a lot of the efficiency stats for Rodgers in Green Bay's final year and Brady in his last New England year were similar. You also had a similarity where the New Orleans Saints were kind of where Buffalo was, where they're, winning 10, 13 games every year. They're kind of getting over the hump. They'd have these playoff losses. So the Saints lost to what? They lost to the Vikings in 19, the Rams in 18, the Vikings in 17, right? So you have this team that's great, but not getting over the hump, a la Buffalo.
Yeah.
And, that New Orleans team spanked Tampa Bay twice in the regular season and then runs out of gas in the divisional round, loses to them after some turnovers and some weirdness there. And I can see that, right? I can see Rodgers. Look, only Rodgers Super Bowl in his entire career came out of the 6th seed. I can see, even if they don't win that division, but they kind of mess around for a whole year, the Jets, much like that Tampa Bay team, roster-wise is stacked. You look at, 2 rookies of the year out there. Offensive line's a little messy, but, defensively just really good talent everywhere. I could see the Jets winning the Super Bowl, and I think probably the best path for them would be kind of to sneak up on people after we're kind of like, oh, yeah, that's cute that Rodgers is playing for the Jets, but it's still the Bills. It's still the Bills division. It's still the Bills conference, a la what we said about New Orleans just a couple of years ago.
And I like the point that you made there, like sneaking up on people, because I see some people kind of making the Jaguars like the hipster pick to kind of potentially be the number 1 overall seed in the AFC. And if they run into the Jets, I think I like the Jets better than the Jaguars overall.
Oh, for sure. And I think, what Rodgers has lost a lot of home playoff games in the playoffs. A lot of that is the cold. We saw Brett Favre, who was once at one time like the cold play. He's a football player of quarterbacks, and then as he got older, you remember that Chicago game in the late 2017, and then he had 2007. I'm sorry. Then they had the really bad game against the Giants in the NFC title game. Like he became a warm weather quarterback, and I think Rodgers, maybe not a warm weather quarterback, but like if he were to go to Jacksonville, right, and then he were to go, let's say he were to go to Cincinnati or somewhere that's maybe not quite as onerous to go to, he could sneak up, like I said, sneak up there. And again, like, I love Kansas City. They're my favorite team, but you're telling me that the Chiefs are incapable of losing to the Jets at home in the AFC title game? Like, no, they've lost to the Bengals. They've blown leads at home in the AFC title game twice. So you look, it's a tail event, but Rodgers is a good enough quarterback where I think anything's possible. And if you're Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh, and the Jets, that was your only out, right? Like, you've done everything to get this team to be good, and you needed a quarterback to obviously, be that last piece. And I think Rodgers is capable of that.
We talk about the symmetry between Favre and Rodgers and whatnot, obviously going from Green Bay to New York. But in both situations, Eric Eager, there's been a Jets quarterback that has gone to Miami because Chad Pennington went to the Dolphins. Now Mike White with the Jets. I just think it would be a hilarious line of symmetry if somewhere down the road in 2023, if Mike White somehow like prevents the Jets from getting into the playoffs, just how perfect that would be, all wrapped up in a neat little ribbon.
Or Zach Wilson had to start a game or two because Rodgers had a COVID or a concussion or something.
Yeah.
And it blew up in their face. But, it's interesting. Like, there's so many parallels. I mean, even think about like Zach Wilson, much like a previous BYU quarterback who really struggled coming out of the gate in the NFL, Steve Young, like sitting behind an all-timer the way that Young did with Montana, might be able to resurrect his career. I was always a big Zach Wilson fan, so I'm sort of rooting for my prediction a little bit. But I think that, there's so many interesting things, even to, again, the fact that Rodgers went from Green Bay to New York, similar to his predecessor in Favre.
We'll go to the AFC North now. You said that you're a Chiefs guy. I'm a Steelers guy. And when I do 2 of them a year, game-by-game predictions to, give my thoughts overall. And I said that I think the Steelers will win the AFC North. And I think a lot of Bengals fans, Ravens fans are like, oh, you think they're a better team than Cincinnati, Baltimore? No. I think that the Bengals are a better team than Pittsburgh. Steelers have a much easier road to get there. A really good defense as well still. They got better on the offensive line, both in free agency and the draft. And Pickens, Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, they're bringing Darnell Washington. I like what they did a lot, and I think it was a really productive offseason for them, a team that was a win away or a Dolphins loss away from being the 7th seed last year after a slow start. If Kenny Pickett can take a little bit of a leap forward and if Pickett just doesn't mess things up and everything else lives up to its potential, then I think the Steelers are a playoff team. I think best case scenario for them is hosting a playoff game, potentially stealing one, and then being out in the divisional round. I think worst case scenario is Kenny Pickett doesn't really take much of a step forward. They're hovering around 9 wins, and they miss out on the playoffs again.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that they've done some good things bringing in Patrick Peterson as a veteran guy. He was a really good addition to the Vikings, somebody who I thought, he was a little bit over the hill. They obviously go with Porter Jr. Also to complement him. Keanu Neal might be a little bit over the hill at linebacker. I think that they're with Landon Roberts and missing out that that kind of middle of the field stuff. But look, Hayward is a top 3 defensive interior player in all of football. Obviously, Watt's an elite player. And then on offensive side of the ball, he's got guys to throw to. Even Demarcus Robinson, who I think as a Chiefs fan was underwhelming. Had a somewhat productive season last year for the Ravens. Interestingly, so. Getting rid of Matt Canada is also probably smart. I think that Pickett, I think Najee Harris, it probably has 1 or 2 more years of being an elite talent. And so, there's something there. The issue is this division's probably the best in all of football. I think when I looked at my projected wins, it had the most wins of any division when you added up the simulation. So it's just going to be hard. But you look at the rest of the division, Cleveland has leaks. I think Cleveland has the most robust roster of the entire division. Baltimore is very, very fragile because you just don't know what's going to happen with Lamar. I think they have a huge ceiling, but the Steelers don't really care about the ceiling of any of these teams, right? They're trying to capitalize on the floor, and the floor is low for Baltimore. And I think Cincinnati, we saw they had a really good comeback from a really slow start last year, and Steelers were a beneficiary of it, especially week 1. But they have some fragility too, as they belly up to pay Burrow and that offensive line, them thinking that Orlando Brown is the second coming of Anthony Munoz. I think that's there is some things that the Steelers can do. I think at their current prices, they probably are of value.
Yeah, and you brought up Baltimore as well. I've talked about this on previous shows too. The fact that we're treating the Odell Beckham Jr. signing at his current age and his current state as oh my goodness, Baltimore finally getting Lamar Jackson some help. I think that speaks to the just pure lack of weapons that they've had at receiver in Lamar's tenure. But the thing with them, and you pointed out, is they could possibly be very talented and very explosive, but how many games are they all going to be on the field together? Because we've seen Lamar's dealt with injury issues. Odell, obviously, Rashad Bateman's got the ankle. They draft Zay Flowers, which move I really liked a lot. I think Zay Flowers is going to be really good. And then their defensive front seven is going to be really good. They still have questions on the back end outside of Marlon Humphrey at corner. So Baltimore, I think their best case is, hey, deep playoff run. Everybody stays healthy. They might be able to be a Super Bowl contender. They got good coaching and whatnot, good players. I think worst case is what we've seen the past 2 seasons. Everybody gets hurt and they're a wild card out again.
Or even not in the playoffs, as the Steelers were beneficiaries of that in 2021. So yeah, it's not a lock that they'll be great. I do like Monken. I think that obviously the last time he was able to call plays for a team, like Ryan Fitzpatrick led the league in yards per play. So there is something good going on there. But and here's the sneaky thing: the injuries in Baltimore are not random. I think that one of the weird things is, like, this is a team that has really struggled with. This is a team that's really struggled with staying healthy, and it doesn't appear that they're doing anything about it. So that would also be a leak that I think people need to sort of look at. One of the other things is that every one of these teams in this division, save Cincinnati, has the hardest schedule, but every one of these teams in this division has a schedule that per game is easier than the average schedule. And so Pittsburgh right now, their average game is about a third of a point easier on the point spread than the average team on a neutral field. Baltimore and Cleveland are similar to that as well. So even if they don't win the division, they'll be in the hunt for a wild card again, because they'll pick up some wins that teams in other divisions don't have the luxury of picking up.
Yeah, I believe that the AFC North plays the AFC South and the NFC West this year. So I mean, there's a lot of winnable games for both of those divisions. Cleveland is, I think, everybody's wild card right now. Just we don't know. It depends on Deshaun Watson. They have the guys, they have the bodies, they have the roster. What's he going to look like? And if they do meet that worst case scenario where they're on the outside looking in again, is that wraps for Kevin Stefanski as head coach? I think there was definitely glimpses. If you go back and watch the Washington game, especially the chemistry that he was building with Donovan Peoples-Jones, there was something there. There's still something there. And the offense is going to continue to revolve around the run game and Nick Chubb, I think. They trade for Elijah Moore. Amari Cooper's still there. Peoples-Jones. They've got guys. It's just, all right, what can the quarterback do? What is the best case scenario for the Browns in your mind?
Well, I think they have Super Bowl caliber talent. I mean, this is a team, with you add Cooper, Elijah Moore, David Njoku's a guy that came on. He was a classic analytics sort of buy-in where you probably wouldn't have, if they would have had the same analytical bend when they drafted him in 2017, they probably wouldn't have. But looking at all of his measurables and metrics, it made a lot of sense to sign him to what they did, and he was really, really good last year. Offensive line's good, especially in the interior. And then you look at the defense. There's a lot to like with Ward and Jonathan Wusu-Koramoah and obviously Garrett, and then you add Zadarius Smith. Hopefully he'll be able to be a part-time enough player where he doesn't fall off the same way he did in Minnesota last year at the end. And so there's a lot there. The question is like, can Stefanski go from the offense that he's had in Minnesota and then early Cleveland, where the quarterback's limited enough, where everything's about running play action, turning your back to the defense, and throwing the stuff over the middle, whereas Watson's much more of a stand-in shotgun, kind of empty sometimes, and pick apart a defense that way. When you watch the Browns games, and it was even like from the preseason, but like especially at the end, it just didn't look comfortable. I think Stefanski's going to have to be the one that molds into Watson versus the other way around, and that's a good question that you had about whether or not he can do that and whether or not he's the long-term answer. Because this is turned into the NBA. Like, you're firing the coach and not the player if that player's the quarterback making the fully guaranteed money. So that to me is the one question. But the absolute ceiling, they're a Super Bowl team.
Yeah, and you pointed out, like, if one of them's going to go, it isn't going to be the guy that gave $230 million to. So it'll be this division. I think there's parallels last year, with the discussions and the conversations about the AFC North to last year with the AFC West. But in all likelihood, we saw what happened with the AFC West last year. 2 of them were bad. I have a hard time seeing more than one team being bad in the AFC North. And if I have to pick the one that I think is going to be bad, it's the one who's historically shown that they're going to be bad, and it's Cleveland. So they are definitely an interesting division here. We talked about Jacksonville a little. Go ahead.
1989, by the way, last time the Browns won a division.
That is insane. It's crazy now that in the way that the division is currently aligned, that the Tennessee Titans have a more recent AFC Central / North Division title than the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, I mean, the Falcons, Saints, and Panthers have all won the NFC West more recently than the Browns won a division, which is kind of insane to think about. But yeah, and obviously it's just been tough for them. I mean, they've had some pop-up seasons, and and they do a good job of picking players. I think getting the quarterback right has been their biggest problem, and now that they, in theory, have done so, it still isn't quite right. Like Watson still has to be, I think, a little bit better than he has been in order for them to have success.
I agree. We talked about Jacksonville a little bit already. They have the easiest road to a playoff berth, playing in a division that's going to start 2, potentially 3 rookie quarterbacks at some point throughout the year, depending on what Tennessee does with Will Levis. But the second half of last year, we really saw Trevor Lawrence show the world that, yeah, I was worth the hype. I think that Baltimore game in which they come back from behind and he makes just a ton of throws in the fourth quarter to help them win the game was kind of the monkey off the back type situation in Jacksonville, where they finally were saying, yes, this is what we drafted this guy for. Year 2 with Doug, I think that's going to make even more of a world of a difference, because we know what both of those guys are capable of. I think there's still a few questions in their defensive backfield, but offensively, it's going to be fireworks, I would assume. I think the best case scenario for them is potentially, again, a trip to the AFC Championship game. Worst case scenario, a one and done. I don't see a world where they don't make the playoffs unless something happens to Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, the Colts are the one leak, I think, in that division. It's weird because everybody and they're like minus 160, minus 170 to win it. So they're a clear favorite. And I would put it more like even money, just given kind of what can go wrong in the NFL. And the hard part when you're the favorite, and this is true about Detroit, this is true about, Jacksonville, historical teams that have struggled. Like, this is only the second time Jacksonville's won this division since the turn of the century. So like this is not a team that has historically done this. And they were similarly favored in 18 coming off of the Blake Bortles year. Now, we all believe that Lawrence is better than Bortles, and I think that that's fair. But when you look at, for example, Houston, they have a pretty good defense. If you look at like the
Houston's got guys scenario, like quietly they have guys.
Yeah, and then you add to that kind of that strong link player in Will Anderson, that and Derek Stingley hopefully coming on and being a 3rd overall pick type guy, they could be a problem. And then, Indianapolis, to me, you have a coach who has coached Hurts to a Super Bowl and Herbert to Rookie of the Year, and you have a guy that at his very ceiling could be both those players, right? And Anthony Richardson. So that's a tough one. And then I think the Titans maybe are the weakest team, even though their win total is second most in the division. But they're a team like, Vrabel gets that team to play with much worse players than their record. So that's where I see the leak, because if you grade it all out, Jacksonville's pretty good. I mean, their offensive line, now they do lose Cam Robinson for the first 4 with PEDs. Yeah. They're replacing Jawan Taylor, who had become a pretty decent right tackle, with Anton Harrison, who's a rookie. That's always a little speculative to do. And then, but at wide receiver, like Zay Jones and Christian Kirk were pretty good together last year with Evan Ingram. You add to that Calvin Ridley. The one thing I do, and this is not easy to talk about when we talk about making predictions and stuff, you do have to consider this. Ridley's issues in Atlanta, while he was an amazing player, Ridley's issues in Atlanta were not just sports betting. They were also him leaving the team for mental health issues, which again, we support those people. We want to we want to invite them to take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. But when handicapping a team, you had to add some probability to that happening. So that's one thing I'm worried about. Etienne's another one. They gave Etienne 299 touches last year, and that was after he didn't start the first 5 games. So that's another one where what happens if he gets banged up because he already missed a year? Do they have a backfield guy that can be as durable and as everything there. That's
you
another
ask
one
some people and they say Tank Bigsby is coming.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay. Yeah, he's one where, and then we did a myself and Thomas Dimitrov, my boss, did a video on him. He's good. I don't know if I trust Thomas's eye a lot. He wasn't enamored with him, but yeah, I do know a lot of people in the fantasy community like him, and I think a lot of that stems from the fact that the Jaguars, even though Etienne averaged 5.1 yards a carry, was a weird 5.1 where the efficiency, the EPA, and all that stuff was not the greatest, and so it's just interesting. Peterson is a very good coach, but he does run the ball a little bit too much on early downs, which kind of killed them in Philly when Wentz was not doing the superhuman stuff on third down like he did in 2017. So again, the Jags are favored. They should be favored to win that division, but I think it's closer to 50-50 than it is kind of where the market has them at right now.
And I like the points that you made about Houston too, because you mentioned Stingley, that Jalen Petrie, that Jimmy Ward comes over with D'Amico Ryans. Then they add Will Anderson. They also got two really good tackles in Tunsil and Howard. I think Stroud's going to mostly remain upright, and that won't be too much of a problem. If Tank Dell turns out to be a solid draft pick as well at receiver, they have a clear vision in Houston, and we'll see how good of a head coach D'Amico Ryans is. We'll see how good an OC Bobby Slowick is. I'm excited for the first time in a while to actually watch the Texans play football, which is, the past 2 years we haven't really been able to say that. So they'll be an interesting case. What's the best case scenario for them? What's the worst case scenario for Houston?
I think a 10-7 type of year where we all are like, oh, hey, look, all kind of a Bengals-ish, not postseason that year, because I don't know if Stroud's capable of that. Okay. But the Bengals in 2021, where it's kind of like, oh, look, the Ravens got hurt. Oh, look, the Steelers are kind of not that good, even though the Steelers made the playoffs that year. And then the Browns are kind of like the Browns implode, right? Mm-hmm. So you could see a situation where maybe Jacksonville comes into the season and the kind of the stuff I said could go wrong for them does, and they go 9-8, 8-9, that type of thing. And Anthony Richardson is as bad as his naysayers say he is, and the Titans don't have that talent. They go to Levis early on, and it's a horror show. Yeah, I think Houston can win 10 games or so. When I look at their strength of schedule, and again, this is huge. Last year, this would have identified, when I talked about the New York Giants, they were a game that every game was a point easier on the point spread per game than the average team on a neutral field. Giants win total was 7. It was a pretty solid, bet over. The only Atlanta and New Orleans have easier schedules this year than Houston does. Houston has per game 0.92 points easier than the average team on a neutral field. So that's one again where, if they go 10-7, it would not shock me. It would be fun, and it would be a little bit weird to see how they went in the playoffs because they're kind of overmatched. But especially at wide receiver, you said Tank Dell, but you look at the current starters for them at wide receiver. And that, to me, is the one place that's C.J. Stroud has never played. He's got great tackles. He had great tackles at Ohio State. He's never kind of had this lack of ability at wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, it's Nico Collins. It's
Robert Woods.
Yeah, they did bring over Bobby Trees. So it's, not the best receiving group in football. I think
the tight end guy, Okawaku.
They brought in Dalton Schultz.
Yeah, and right, and Schultz and I mean, if their tight ends play well, they could be okay because the one kid was 2.6 yards per route run last year, which is best in the NFL among tight ends. Obviously, he had low snap counts and stuff, but he was very efficient. So there's, like I said, there's a path for Houston to be pretty good.
Going to the AFC West, we talked about them a little bit, but their week 1 game against the Miami Dolphins is going to be just a hellscape on social media. The Los Angeles Chargers, and, after the wild card loss to Jacksonville, I think a lot of people were calling for Brandon Staley's head, and rightfully so. But Joe Lombardi ends up being the scapegoat. They luck into getting Kellen Moore, who ends up being a scapegoat in Dallas, and so they bring him in at offensive coordinator. They bring in Quentin Johnson in the draft to go along with Mike Williams, Keenan Allen. There's a similar situation with Cleveland where they have the guys. Their problem hasn't necessarily been more health related, where these guys just don't stay healthy. And plus, Brandon Staley's made a lot of questionable decisions as a head coach. I think health has been the big question for the Chargers, where, all right, got J.C. Jackson, bum ankle. He's gone most of the year. All right, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, both of them dealing with injuries. Derwin James is always, you're walking on thin ice with him in terms of injuries. And then Mike Williams and Keenan Allen dealt with it as well. Like, at some point, like, DeAndre Carter was Justin Herbert's number one receiver at one point last year. They if they stay healthy and Brandon Staley, I think that they could be a playoff team. But I've drank the Kool-Aid from the Chargers in far too many case scenarios, and they've let me down before. I have a hard time doing it, even though I think their quarterback's really good.
Yeah. By the way, I have to correct myself that Okwuonu, the tight end, he plays for Tennessee. I know people will shout at me in the comments if I don't correct myself. But that, missed that one. I look, the Chargers, Rashawn Slater missed last year too.
He did a lot. Yeah.
Big issues. Like, when you look at every single year, there's always something with the Chargers. Now, as a Chiefs fan, you laugh at that kind of stuff, but I'm also a little worried because I don't think that many people are all on the Chargers this year. Like, you don't see everybody. Like, I think they learned their lesson last year where like half of NFL.com analysts picked the Chargers to win the division and half blah, blah, blah. Jamie Erdahl picked the Chiefs to miss the playoffs. I don't think that I think that the Chiefs earned their respect winning a Super Bowl in like a rebuild year, which is crazy. I look at Kellen Moore, I think to myself, like, what has Kellen Moore done that has earned any sort of disrepute in the NFL? Because when he took over, they led the NFL in yards per play. When Dak was healthy in 2020, they were one of the most efficient offenses, in the league. And then, he got hurt and they kind of fought their way back. Then 2021, Dak was blazing everybody. Then he has the calf injury. They win a game in Minnesota versus Cooper Rush as the quarterback. And then Dak's never really the same. You had that weird play call where Dak ran a quarterback draw with no timeouts and all that stuff when they were in San Fran. I think that hurts a little bit. And then last year, no deep threat when they lost Cooper. They get and yet they're still really efficient. And he's still they're always in the upper tier, even though Dak Prescott, I think all of us believe he's maybe a step below that elite passer.
Yeah.
And Moore has just always kept that Dallas team in a group of really efficient offenses. And that's with Zeke falling off. That's with the offensive line kind of needing pieces in and out with Tyron Smith and stuff. And so you bring him over to Los Angeles, and I'm not saying Joe Lombardi. Joe Lombardi gets too much flack because everybody wants Herbert to be the next best thing. And so they all pushed all the negativity onto him, but I don't think he was great. And so you add more into the mix. Staley is still really good at in-game decision making when you think about timeouts, delays the game, and all that. He backslid on fourth downs last year, which was tough to watch. If he even reverts halfway back to his first year, they're going to get an edge there. And then it's just all about staying healthy, which we know the Chargers are just terrible at. So they're injury luck away from, I think, being a 12-win team and challenging Kansas City for that division. It's just there's a million, the Chiefs have a million ways to win. The Chargers have a million ways to lose. And that's always the difference between those two teams.
I like the way that you put that, definitely. And again, I agree with you that I haven't seen too many pundits being, pounding the table for the Chargers this year, because I think that a lot of them do have buyer's remorse when it comes to, doing it in 2022. And I think it's a lot of the same song and dance that we've done with Justin Herbert. We know the talent is there. It's about making it happen. You mentioned the efficiency thing with Tua, and that was a good point where Herbert has more talent. We just need to see it more from an efficiency standpoint. Now we'll see. We'll see what the offense does this year. Having a guy like that, they're always going to be fun to watch. They're always going to be, a team that you pay attention to. But it'll be interesting. Sticking with the AFC West, though, the Las Vegas Raiders. I think that most people would probably put them in contention for being having a top five pick in the 2024 draft. They go lateral by, bringing in Jimmy Garoppolo, getting rid of Derek Carr. Devontae Adams seems angry. And if you can name more than 5 Raiders defenders without saying Chandler Jones or Max Crosby, you deserve a medal. I don't know what they're going to look like, man, but I don't think it's going to be good. I think best case scenario for them is they're at least somewhat competitive and sneaky fun. But I don't see more than 7 wins for them. I think worst case scenario, they're drafting in the top 3.
Yeah, it's tough. I agree with you. Let me look at where we are from a predictive perspective, because it doesn't. And this is, it's sort of sad for Josh McDaniel, because he kind of had the same thing happen to him when he was in Denver, where that second year is just it might be so bad that he doesn't even make it. We have them about 7.5 wins. They do have a tough schedule, about a half a point harder than the average team on a neutral field, just a 26% chance to make the playoffs. So it doesn't look good. I think that the hardest part for them is I don't know if this season gets them anywhere, right? What I mean is, like with Green Bay, for example, you're figuring out about Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur. Like, how good is Matt LaFleur, right? How good is Jordan Love? You're figuring that out. In Chicago, same thing with their quarterback. Indianapolis, Houston, Tennessee, you're figuring those things out. Like, what information do you gather about a year where you're starting Jimmy Garoppolo and no one really behind him of any sort of there's really no like plan there. And so I get worried about like, what really are you learning from this season? Because to me, that's the worst case scenario. You win 7 games, you get like the 6th pick in the draft, 7th pick in the draft, and you kind of learn nothing about your young players that you really never had, because Mike Mayock and John Gruden kind of pissed away all those picks. Sure. Then what are you really learning? Because if you're in a division with the Broncos, who I think are going to be pretty good, the Chargers, who we just discussed, pretty good, Chiefs, obviously best team in football probably, then your best thing to do is to win 2 or 3 games, learn something about a bunch of your players, get a high draft pick, and move forward. I just don't know if that's going to be. I think they're going to be too good to do that, which is unfortunate.
See, I think we might be a little bit on the opposite ends of this, because I think by like week 7, Davante Adams is going to hate Jimmy Garoppolo. He's going to get overthrown on the sideline once again, and he's just going to snap.
But what does that do? Like, that doesn't. There's no, like, who's their backup? They don't really have a backup. That, I mean, was it Hoyer? Like, they don't really have a backup.
Yeah, I think they brought in Hoyer. Yeah.
Yeah, like so that's cool that we learned, like, but there's nothing to build off of. And you could say the same thing about Minnesota, right? With Cousins, you can say the same thing about some of these other teams that have kind of mid guys that, even with like in Detroit, like if Jarrett Goff completely falls off the table, like you're going to play Hendon Hooker and at least find out what that pick was worth. In Tennessee, you found out that Malik Willis couldn't play, right? We found that out right away. And this team, I mean, Tyree Wilson is kind of like maybe the one piece that you can build around and sort of see whether or not he's good, but
maybe Trevon Mayrig, depending.
It's tough.
It is very tough, especially in that division where you got to play Kansas City twice a year, and they, like, Andy Reid went out of his way to do like a small Broadway production before a play last season just to rub it in your face because he knew that he could. The Chargers are still going to be viable. We'll see with Denver. Denver to me is fascinating in so many ways because we know that they have the talent defensively. I can't remember what the number was, but if the Broncos had scored like or averaged like 1.5 more per game, they would have gone like 12-5 last season or something ridiculous like that, where they just couldn't score and the defense was playing balls to the wall every week and they just couldn't do anything offensively. I think Sean Payton is probably good for that 1.5 at least. And I think that they're going to lean more into running the ball. I think we've kind of seen that with the way they've built their team this offseason, bringing in a guy like Mike McGlinchey, who comes from a run-centric system with Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. And I think a lot of people, my buddy JP Acosta saying, pounding the table, go get Dalvin Cook and have a committee of running backs and don't make the offense, let Russ cook. I think that having Russ just serve TV dinners is what this offense kind of needs this year.
100. I think it's incredibly well said. 2 good tackles. Interior players who I think can play. Obviously, wide receivers out there. They've had some injuries.
I think quietly they might have the best quartet of receivers in the NFL. Like they go 4 or 5 deep, and those are all legit guys.
Yep. And then at tight end, Dulcich is okay too. And then defensively, I think that the one thing is Ejiro Evero is his loss a big loss? I think so. And can they get edge pressure? They got rid of Bradley Chubb in the middle of last season, so you're looking at Randy Gregory and what's left of Frank Clark, which is a Chiefs fan. I can tell you like if you get into late January, there's a lot left, but besides that, there's not much play for play. So I'm a little like, but we're looking at a guy in Sean Payton that 2 years ago started Trevor Siemian, Ian Book, Jameis Winston, and I mean that guy, and then obviously Taysom Hill at quarterback, and went 9-8. I mean, they're making the playoffs in 2021 if the Niners don't come back from 17 down against the Rams in Week 18. So I think Payton was worth every penny as far as the acquisition. I think that he'll do the thing there. I also think Wilson, and I don't mean to, Drew Brees and Russell Wilson are not the same player, but they have a lot of some of the same things in terms of height and all that kind of stuff. So I think Wilson will be fine. It's hard for me to imagine a guy being so good and for it
just completely falling off a cliff,
especially because Seattle had more than one offensive coordinator. It'd be different if he had one offensive coordinator the whole time, and that marriage broke up, and they're like, "Oh, okay, that was the one variable." But Russ had a bunch of OCs that ultimately got similar production out of him, and so I think he'll be better, and especially because last season I can think some of it was physical. I think that they'll win 10 games this year. I do think the Broncos at 2-1, I think, are the best bet among AFC teams that are beyond even money to make the playoffs.
Yeah, when I did the first, game by game stuff, I think I had them going 8-9. But the more I think about it, man, when I do the final iteration of those, they might be a playoff team in my mind, simply because, the head coach makes that much a difference. If they can just score a little bit more, like that defense is really good. And I'm with you, too, having a hard time believing that a guy who had a Hall of Fame trajectory could just fall off and just be horrible. I think a lot of it was Nathaniel Hackett just not being the guy for the job, and the fact that they got rid of him as fast as they could speaks volumes. Denver is, if not the most fascinating team in the conference, definitely among them.
Yeah, the only thing for me that's tough is it's so crowded, right? So for them to make the playoffs, you basically need one team out of the South, which is reasonable, and you need a meltdown or two out of the East and the North. And that there's enough good quarterbacks. Like the biggest meltdown proof player on a team is the quarterback, and so it's hard to see like a team like Buffalo, New York. Obviously, but Baltimore has the injury position there, but Cincinnati, Cleveland, like they need a few of those teams to melt down so that they can get in there, because it's going to be hard for them to go better than like 2-2 against the Chiefs and the Chargers. They haven't beaten the Chiefs since week 2 of 2015. So it's not a task that they're up to all that often. Very
much true. Eric Eager, Sumer Sports. Hey, it was good doing this with you, my friend. What do you have coming over on Sumer Sports in the coming days?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the Sumer Sports Show, myself and Thomas Dimitrov. We've been letting some other people take the show a little bit this summer. So Thomas and I have been doing it about once a week, and then we do a Wednesday show, a Friday show, and a Monday show. We're going to sumersports.com for some really cool content. We had an article the other day by Sean Syed about Shanahan's schemes, which was amazing. And we're going to have more stats pages and stuff like that, and some really cool content. We're going to bring on some writers this fall. So I'm extremely excited about our direction, and I'm pumped about this football season because it's just, the league is such an interesting group now that, the conferences are so misaligned and all this kind of stuff. It's fun to kind of talk about where all the teams are going.
I'm looking forward to seeing you continuing your success. Looking forward to keeping up with it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening. Go back and listen to the last episode with Ross Jackson and Amy Trask. It's the Pump Fake. We'll see you soon. Eric, buddy, this is a lot of fun.
Hey, this was great. Thanks for having me.
See you guys. Thank you.